Algebra 1, Final Exam Guided Review 2, numbers 6 and 7. Yep, 6 and 7. Number 6, solve by completing the square. And here's what we're solving. We're solving x squared minus 11x plus 3 equals 5. Okay, completing the square is when we force the left-hand side, in this case we'll work the left-hand side, to become a perfect square, not a difference of squares, but a perfect square, so that we can get it as like parentheses x plus something and parentheses squared equals something. Then we can take the square root of both sides and go from there. So what did we do? Well, let's see. We move constants to the right-hand side. So we're gonna subtract 3 from both sides. So that'll give us x squared minus 11x equals 2. Next, we add to both sides a b over 2 squared. So that will give us x squared minus 11x plus negative 11 halves squared equals 2 plus negative 11 halves squared. All right. It's going to be a little bit ugly. By the way, just to clarify, these steps work when you are starting with a 1x squared. The only difference if we didn't start with a 1x squared is that we would have a different first step, and the first step would be to start out by dividing everything by whatever the coefficient of x squared term is. And then you would do all of these steps from here. But we've just, Algebra 1, we're simplifying it, and we're doing this kind of problem starting out with a 1x squared already. Okay, so what can we do now? Well, step 3. The left-hand side becomes x plus b over 2 squared. So what that gives us is our left-hand side becomes x. Well, what was our b over 2? B over 2 was this negative 11 halves. So x minus 11 halves squared is what our left-hand side becomes. And we still have this equals 2 plus a negative 11 halves squared, which we can go, so let's simplify the right-hand side. I'll say and simplify the right-hand side. So I still have this x minus 11 halves squared equals 2 plus, well, let's see, when I square the top, I get 121. When I square the bottom, I get 4. So that's the same thing as x minus 11 halves squared equals, so I want to combine these, so I need this to be in terms of fourths. So 2 is the same thing as 8 fourths. So I'm going to write this as 8 fourths plus 121 fourths. Okay, so that will give me x minus 11 halves squared equals 129 fourths. Okay. Step 4, square root both sides. And I'll say, don't forget the plus or minus on the right-hand side. So that's going to give me, so when I square root the left-hand side, because the left-hand side is something squared, when you square root a squared, the squaring and square rooting cancel each other out, and we're just left with x minus 11 halves. And then we get equals plus or minus the square root of 129 over 4. Well, let's simplify that right-hand side a little bit. So we get x minus 11 halves equals plus or minus this same thing as the square root of 129 over the square root of 4. Well, what's the square root of 4 but 2? So I can rewrite this as x minus 11 halves equals plus or minus square root of 129 over 2. Let's see if that square root of 129 simplifies. It's not going to be divisible. 129 cannot be rewritten as 4 times something because it's not an even number. Can it be written as 9 times something? Nope. Let's see. Can it be written? It can't be written as 16 times something. So can it be written as my next perfect square up is 25 as 25 times something? Nope. So I don't think this can simplify at all. Nope, it cannot. All right, so then we can just add add 11 halves to both sides. So we get x equals 11 halves plus or minus square root of 129 over 2. And because I have the same denominator here, let's go ahead and combine this. So I get 11 plus or minus the square root of 129, all of that over 2. That's my exact answer. And then my rounded answers, this is my exact answer. My rounded answers would be to take each of these and to use a calculator to approximate. So this would be, so we can say x is, I'm going to take my x 11 minus root 129 over 2. And then x is also my 11 plus. Even though this is plus or minus, I like to put my minus first because it gives me my smaller answer first and then my bigger answer. 11 plus root 129 over 2. Okay, so this is approximately, I'm going to do 11 minus the square root of 129 equals, I'm going to do divided by 2 equals, and I get negative 0.18. Negative 0.18. Approximately. And then if I do my plus, I do 11 plus root 129 equals, divided by 2 equals, and we get approximately 11.18. And just to make sure just to make sure that it looks like I did this correctly, I'm going to take one of these, maybe my 11.18, and plug it into my original equation and see if it checks out. So if I plug 11.18 in for x, my left-hand side should come to be something very close to 5. It won't come to be exactly 5 because 11.18 is a rounded value. So let's see what I get. 11.18 squared minus 11 times 11.18 plus 3 is 5.0124. So, yay, it checks out, knowing that I'm using a rounded value. Sweet. That was number 6. Number 7, solve using the... Oh, by the way, this kind of problem. Sorry for all the scrolling. Solve by completing the square. I can say this. You might have one of these on the final exam. You might not. I'm not quite sure yet. It's something that may or may show up. If it does show up, it'll just be one problem. Number 7, solve using the quadratic formula. I can guarantee you'll have at least one or two of these on the test. Just because it's something you really should walk away from Algebra 1 knowing how to do. So we're solving 3x squared plus 4x equals 2. Okay, so let's double check our quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. If you haven't memorized that yet, find a way to memorize it. You can look up on YouTube. There are different jingles, different tunes that people have memorized it to. Yeah, but got to pound this into your head so we can use it. So let's list what a, b, and c are, but first we need to get this in standard form. Standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So I need to rewrite this as 3x squared plus 4x minus 2 equals 0. Now I can say my a is 3, b is 4, c is negative 2. Okay, so now I can plug those values into my quadratic equation, my quadratic formula. Negative b is going to be negative 4. Be careful if b is negative, that you probably do a negative, if like b was negative 4, that you would do a negative 4, which would give you a positive 4. But here, since b is positive, we have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that is 4 squared. If b is a negative number, you must put it in parentheses. If b was a negative 4, you must do a parentheses negative 4 and parenthesis squared. Otherwise, you're not writing that correctly, and you're either going to get a wrong answer or you're going to get the right answer, but not written, or what you get will not be consistent with what you should have gotten the way that you wrote it. All right. Minus 4 times a is 3, times c, which is negative 2. All of that over 2a, which is 2 times 3. Okay, now we need to simplify. This is negative 4 plus or minus the square root of, well, let's see, this is 16. I have a negative, so it's going to become plus. 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24. Over 6. So that's the same thing as negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 plus 24 is 40, right? 24, 34, yeah, 40. 40 over 6, which that is the same thing as, I'm going to, just to keep it all on this page, I'm going to go up here next. That's the same thing as negative 4 plus or minus, well, 40 is 4 times 10. So with the 4 inside the square root, that becomes a 2 outside. So it's the same thing as 2 root 10 over 6. Everything is divisible by 2, so I can factor a 2 out of the top, and that cancels with the 2 in the bottom. So that gives me negative 2 plus or minus square root of 10 over 3. That is my exact answer. And then our rounded answers, we would do the same thing. We would do our, here's our rounded. I would do a negative 2 minus the square root of 10, enter, divided by 3, enter, or equals, depending on what your calculator does. That's a negative 1.72. And I'm going to do a negative 2 plus square root of 10, enter, divided by 3, enter, and that gives me 0.39. Those are my rounded answers, which again, I could go back to my original equation. If I plug a 0.39 in for x on the left-hand side, I should get something very close to 2. So 3 times 0.39 squared plus 4 times 0.39, I get 2.0163. The left-hand side is very close to 2. I'm using a rounded value, so that close is good enough. That is number 7. So again, know the quadratic formula. I can guarantee there will be at least 1 or 2 problems like this on the final exam. Oh, they don't always end up this ugly. Sometimes they come out to be fractions. Sometimes they come out to be integers. Just work with whatever the numbers give you. Okay, that is number 6 and 7.